So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today at the JICA Ogata Research Institute Knowledge Forum. My name is Masuko. I'll be serving as a moderator. So please turn on the camera or video. I'm asking all the participants, the moderator and speaker today. So we'd like to start 11th Knowledge Forum. The diffusion of the Japanese rice farming technology to Asia and further to Africa will be starting. First of all, we'd like to have the opening remark by Koji Maquino, the Director General of JICA Ogata Research Institute. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Maquino. So today, we welcome the Dr. Keijiro Otsuka, the extraordinary professor at Kobe University, who has been studying rice farming in Asia and Africa for many years. And I myself have been working with Professor Otsuka for more than 15 years and have received a wide range of guidance on agriculture development, rice farming, land issues, and industrial policies. So, the Professor Otsuka, welcome to the forum. Before we begin, let me talk a little bit about this Knowledge Forum. The JICA Ogata Institute has been organizing this Knowledge Forum since 2019 with an aim of providing up-to-date information on the development of cooperation and ODA and a forum for free discussion. And this will be the 11th event by inviting Professor Otsuka. From 2020, the event will be held online. Event has been held online. The online has the advantage that the participants can attend from anywhere, but at the same time, rather difficult to interact with each other because it's not a direct sort of face-to-face meeting. But we'd like to secure more than 15 minutes for the Q&A session today, so we welcome your question and comment. So we'd like to be frank and quite free about the discussion. And talking about the aim of this Knowledge Forum, then of course the key speaker is Professor Otsuka. So he will speak about the history of the expansion of rice farming technology from Japan to Asia and Green Revolution of rice farming in Africa, and also about the Green Revolution. So the card, as you may have known, the JICA has been dedicating community for the advancement of the rice cultivating Africa activities and initiatives. And actually, we set the goal to double the production of the rice in 10 years. And we actually achieved that goal. And right now, we are in the second phase. Having said that, after 10 years of experience, we have encountered many challenges. In Africa, the Green Revolution not yet happened. What is the issue? What is the bottleneck? And what kind of thing JICA should focus on and can make the contribution? That's the issue we'd like to discuss with Professor Otsuka. And now let me introduce about the program as well as other speakers. So first, let me introduce Professor Otsuka. So he has experience as professor, and also right now he is the special professor at the Center for Social System Innovation, Kobe University. He has long been actively engaged in research in the field of development economics, and his research achievement mainly in agriculture and industrial development strategies in Asia and Africa are highly evaluated internationally. For his significant achievement, he was awarded the Order of the Sacred Treasure Golden Silver Star by the Japanese government last autumn. So he has continued the continuous sort of research and also support for the card by JICA. And since 2009, he provided us with a great contribution in this area. Today, Professor Otsuka will first give a keynote speech on diffusion of Japanese rice farming technology from Asia and further to Africa. actually under the same title, he actually delivered a lecture to His Majesty to Emperor at the Imperial Palace in January this year. And he will actually give us the same title lecture today. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from him all the details. And that keynote lecture followed by the panel discussion. To that, we have the discussant, Dr. Masao Kikuchi, Professor Emeritus of the Chiba University, and Tatsushi Tsuboi, the JICA Senior Advisor on Rice Farming Technology. And also, the senior researcher, Fujika, actually served as a moderator. Dr. Kikuchi has served as the Dean of the Faculty of Horticulture in Chiba University and one of the leading experts on the agricultural economies in Japan and the world. And regarding Mr. Tsuboi, he is the expert and leading the person of the Nerika rice dissemination in Africa. And he is actually known as Mr. Nerika. Lastly but not least, today we have the keynote lecture by Professor Otsuka, 30 minutes, and panel discussion will last about 20 minutes, and we have also 15 minutes Q&A session. So without further ado, please start. Thank you very much, Mr. Maquino. So all the panelists and speakers, please turn off the video once. Later, I would ask you to turn on again. So now I'd like to invite Professor Otsuka to give us a lecture about the dissemination of the Japanese rice farming technology from Asia and further to Africa.
Thank you very much. This is Otsuka speaking. Thank you very much for the introduction. I am very happy to be able to have this opportunity to present about this topic at the Knowledge Forum. As Mr. Makino said, and, on the same topic, on the 15th of January this year, I gave the same topic lecture to His Majesty, the Emperor, but for 20 minutes at that time. But today I have 30 minutes, and then for my lecture to His Majesty, I was not able to use the slide deck, but I can use the PowerPoint slide today. So I think I can cover about the double of the volume. One of the stories that I would like to talk today is the following. This is about the long journey of the rice technology with lots of trouble. Pre-war Japan was the start, and they went to Taiwan and then to the Philippines, and then other tropical Asia, Southeast Asian areas, and Southern Asians. And for some reasons, it seems that they can achieve a Sub-Saharan Africa, but not quite. So I would like to talk about how we can make it happen to achieve in Sub-Saharan Africa. There was a shortage of rice production in Japan at the end of First World War I, and there was a Ponlai rice varieties development that was on a high yield variety, and that was like a prototype of the later IRA. And then also the high yield and high efficient technology were developed. And then in the 1950s and 1960s, then Asia was suffering from a famine. And in the Philippines, and the Rockefeller Foundations and the Ford Foundations established the Rice Research Institute, International Rice Research Institute, IRRI, and then a semi-dwarf high-yielding Taiwanese variety and tall low-yielding Indonesian variety were crossed. And the so-called miracle rice IR8 was born in 1966. And then improvement continued, and then it went from Philippines to other South Asian countries. And it seems obvious that it would travel over to arrive at South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, but the technology transfer has not been really happening. And this is from Professor Hayami and Professor Kikuchi. at the beginning of the Meiji era, the production volume of Japan was about 2 tons, and then it went up to 3 tons at that time, thanks to the technology improvement, but then it plateaued at that time. And then there was a food crisis, and the so-called riot happened with an attacks of the government office buildings. And then the government of Japan decided to increase the volume of production in Taiwan and Korea. And Taiwan made a remarkable increase. Korea followed with some time lag. Taiwan increased sharply the production volume immediately. And then in 1960s and 70s, and in Asia, what was happening in tropical Asia? Well, the population explosion with a more than 2.5% growth in population per annum was happening. To give you an image, and there were 6 or 7 children per family, and then no uncultivated land was available in nature, and then food production was stagnant, so there was a sense of crisis. And in India, I think it was there were droughts, and also in 1966, and then 1.5 million people passed away. So people were despaired there, and then expected for a lot more people to die. And then American ambassador to Professor Edwin Reicherer. I don't know him personally, but then I was preparing for my entrance exam for universities, and with the bilingual versions of the text and written by the Professor Reicherer, talking about the sense of crisis and the urgency for the food crisis. And then the gist of his message was to encourage Japanese nationals, youth, to tackle that issue. And then being encouraged by his message, I entered Hokkaido University to study agricultural sciences. So now there are some indicators. This gray line, which is not really clear on the slide, this is a population. It takes that the population grows steadily, and then the grain volume, production volume is in blue, and in West Bengal, due to the poor harvest, that people died, and then it was said that it was critical. And around 1979, when I took the PhD degree, the blue line exceeded the gray line. That means that the grain production volume exceeded the population growth. So that issue was resolved, and then the technology was transferred from Japan to Taiwan, and from Taiwan, and also from Japan directly to tropical Asia. Rice farming technology were transferred, and the so-called Green Revolution happened. And then starting from the 1970s, the food production growth exceeded the growth of the population. So the food crisis problem was resolved, and then in the entire history of the humankind, the most important revolution is the Industrial Revolution, and second to the second most important one is this Green Revolution. And the Japanese nationals made a tremendous contribution for that Green Revolution to happen, but it is very little known in Japan. Japanese nationals should be really proud of this huge contribution, but very few people know. And then it is often said that the Green Revolution is not very interesting. It just uses a lot of fertilizers, and then it ruins the soil. And then when I was involved in JICA, some high-ranking officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan told me that the notorious Green Revolution, JICA is trying to do that in Africa. How do you think about it? And I said that he was not really having the right knowledge. So the Green Revolution, what is it exactly? The Rice Green Revolution refers to the development and diffusion of a series of semi-dwarf, fertilizer-responsive, high-yielding rice varieties since 1966. And then if it's semi-dwarf, and then if the column is thick, it can be fertilizer-responsive, and then it does not fall down it can be resistant to lodging, and it can be it was improved thanks to the technology to become resistant to the pests and the diseases. However, the rice seeds can be self-produced by farmers very easily. It can be copied. So the seed commercializers cannot make a lot of profit from that, because if the seeds are developed by them and if they are sold to the farmers, farmers can reproduce and that. So it is not amenable to the development by the profit-oriented private enterprises. And also, for instance, IR 51 is a lower mosh and a very high yielding. And it was developed in Philippines, but it can be very useful in other countries like US. So in order to develop rice farming technologies, international cross-border type of mindset is very much essential for the organization. So IRRI was a very excellent idea. And of course, chemical fertilizers are required to increase the yield. And for that reason, Green Revolution was also called that seed fertilizer revolution. And I believe that World Bank experts are still believing in that, which is the problem and the major source of the problem in the context of Sub-Saharan Africa, in my view. And I'm going to elaborate on that thought later on. So this is a wrap-up of what I have talked, and then as you can see at the number 2, one parent of IR8 was semi-dwarf Taiwanese variety, and that was, well, many Japanese researchers went to Taiwan, so I am sure that they developed this variety, but unfortunately there is no evidence. Similar story happened in the case of high-yielding varieties of wheat, developing a gene from Norin 10 developed in the 1920s in Japan, or its ancestors, and when it comes to high-yield fields which are cropped in rest of the world.
So as you can see on the left-hand side, this is the native variety in Japan, and the right one is the much shorter height. So as you can see, so this is scale actually is like 80 centimeters, and the higher one is like 130 centimeters. When or the harvesting time, when the top part become heavier, the original native the variety tend to fall down. And this is a modern variety, so to speak. We said enough varieties, and there are some differences, but these are the example of different countries like Philippines and Gray. The high yield variety developed, and this is around the time I studied and did research in Philippines. And in case of Vietnam, well, up to 1975, Vietnam War actually lasted and finished in 1975. Without war, maybe the growth would be much similar to the Philippine growth curve. And we need some the adaptation researches to plant the rice variety to Bangladesh. We can't directly bring the Philippine variety to Bangladesh. So that's why we had different sort of curve. And this is the unit yield. In case of Philippines, the blue is not doing well because I believe that due to the typhoon, but it's like 1.2 ton become 1.4, and that's kind of 2.4, and then that's kind of revolutionary. In case of Bangladesh, in orange, they're almost starving in farming all the times in the past image, but 1.6 ton, for example, right now reached to 5 ton, nearly 5, and much higher growth observed in Vietnam. This is the global production, and 90% of the rice production is actually done in Asia, because of the green revolution, I have to say. And this is actual price of the rice in the market. Sometimes for the rice, we have kind of wrong investment. So then if we flatten all these sort of extreme cases, actually the price has been reduced maybe almost 1/3. I believe the consumer is the greatest beneficiaries of the green revolution. And for example, if you actually produce cabbage excessively, and then price will go down in the market. Sometimes they happen by mistake, but Agricultural Corp actually take the leadership to somehow destroy those excess production, and it's kind of wasting. It's not the right answer, but that would not happen to rice. And also, at the same time, so to speak, the kind of the victims are those Asian countries which can't introduce the green revolution. Likewise, those countries who's not successful in green revolution in Sub-Sahara Africa. I'm saying this because the rice producer in Africa, well, even though the price of the rice goes down, but their productivity has not been growing to match that trend, so they are not really benefited. Having said that, what is happening in Africa is as follows. So quite recently, they also have the explosion of the population. And, well, you might see some pictures that there are animals walking on the field or the savanna, but it's not just a part of the Africa. But in overall, they have not been able to cultivate a lot of land to produce sufficient amount of food. The agricultural technology-wise, the level of Africa is not so high and not so efficient. So, for example, if China or Indonesia or India try to catch up to Japan and then whole Asian region, will become the kind of importer of the rice, and then the price of the rice will be very much increasing in the near future. That might be the case in the near future. So my point is that's why Africa should be able to produce the sufficient amount of rice by themselves. So then the question is why the green revolution has not yet happened in Africa. Well, not zero, but still we can't say the green revolution is successful in Africa in the right area. Then why it is the case? That's a big question. So the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are quite hot issue in Japan. And the first goal, the first SDGs is the no poverty and no hunger as second goal. So not just for rice growing, but the production of the food is definitely need to be done in order to achieve that goal. Then yes, this is a graph. So like the Asian situation I showed before, the grayish is the population and the blue is the production. So the production is almost aligning to the growth of the population, but wherever the blue line goes under the gray line, it means the food shortage. But the gap has been narrowing quite recently. But if they have some famine or drought for 2 years, they still have difficulties.
Lowland rice. in my view, is the most promising crop in the sub-Saharan Africa. The first reason why is, as you can read here in the red letters, the farming growing technologies from Asia can be transferable as is. And because if it's an corn, it is very peculiar to local properties, and so it cannot be transferred as is. But the rice is much more universal. So the transferability of the technology is much better. And also the second reason is that there is an abundant endowment of unused martial land in the area of sub-Saharan Africa. And irrigation. From that viewpoint, the most favorable area is a hot and a dry area. Like there's very high temperature and then dry. Well, the typical area with that characteristic is Egypt, and Egypt has the highest level of yielding. And African people love rice, and they love to eat rice, and in every restaurant in Africa, rice is served, and then 1/3 of the consumption of rice in Africa is now being imported from Asia. Well, currently, it is cheap. Some people think it's fortunate, lucky, but some people think it's a problem because if the production volume in India and China decrease, and cheap rice will not be available in Asia and will not be imported in the same volume as now to Africa. So why the Sub-Saharan Africa failed to realize the Green Revolution? There are a lot of reasons they mentioned: inactive national agricultural research centers, insufficient application of a chemical fertilizer, poor access to credit, inadequate investment in irrigation, lack of mechanization, etc. In the 1970s, when the Green Revolution happened in Asia, buffaloes acted in a major role. And then when buffaloes were replaced by power tractors, the yield had a little change. But due to the sleeping sickness in Africa, there are no cow, no buffaloes. So I feel sorry for them. And then weak agricultural extension systems is another reason. And one more is that fundamental cultivation practices, and such as band contrast construction, leveling, and then straight row transplanting, appropriate weeding, appropriate harvesting, good timing of harvesting and drying are not adopted in many areas in sub-Saharan Africa. In Asia, when we talk about the rice paddy, there are always bunds, but it is not the case in Africa. In Africa, there are a lot of rice paddy fields without bunds. Mr. Tsuboi and Tomitaka-san, is he still based out of Tanzania? No longer now. Well, those experts of rice farming technology that I respect a lot, these two gentlemen gave me a lot of teaching about the problem of the lack of the bunds and in the rice field in Africa and so forth. And this is about the irrigation ratio in tropical Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. As you can see that the ratio in sub-Saharan Africa is very low. But this is about overall agriculture. I think it should be about 15% irrigation ratio when it comes to rice production. And as you can see here, the cultivation area per rural population in tropical Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. Well, it used to be abundant in Sub-Saharan Africa. The current situation, due to the decrease in the meantime, is almost the same as the Asia in 1960s. So extensive farming is no longer the right solution. So this is a lower mosh. This is a beautiful paddy field in Tanzania, and you can see these varieties are semi-dwarfing and high yielding. So IR51 or other varieties which can be brought from Asia they are growing beautifully here. I think it is about 7 tons in this particular area, or 5 or 6 tons at least. 4.2 ton is the average in Asia, so 5 or 6 ton is really a high yield. And then this is one paddy fields without bund. This is also another one in Tanzania, and this can give me a relief to my mind because there are bunds. And this is, I'm wondering what is this? There is one huge, excessively large bund here. So maybe Europeans who do not know much about rice paddy taught about people. This is in Mozambique. If you look at this picture, well, one should wonder, is this paddy field or grass field? There are local varieties and no much practices. Well, Mozambique is about 1 ton per hectare. It is one of the lowest yield in Africa, and maybe Heian, equivalent of Heian era in Japan, perhaps.
And this is a leveled land. So once the land is leveled, you can see there's such the fine growing. And this is the straight row planting. Transplanting is actually achieved in this paddy. And I forgot to mention, well, without bunt, we can't pool the water. It means there are lots of weed growing. The reason why we keep the water in the rice paddy is that to somehow avoid growing of the wheat. And also this, well, lady, by some reason, I don't know, they cut or harvest the rice with knife. This happens because each plant, well, the growth of the rice is rather uneven. So they can't harvest all at once. Therefore, she tried to cut the rice once it's grown sufficiently. So, well, this is simply because they didn't level the land. So, I'm talking about rather negative things, but I have to tell. Well, this is one of my favorite graph. So this is a comparison of India, SSA, and top 5 countries. And, well, this is India because I believe that the climate would be similar to Africa, Sub-Sahara Africa. And also the orange line is the top 5 Sub-Sahara African country which had the top 5, the highest top yields per unit. So at the beginning, they didn't have much gap in a unit yield, but later India shows that great growth. And in the course of time, well, the Sub-Sahara Africa started to show a kind of the growth a little bit, especially after 2000, due to, I think, the contribution by JICA. So it's like from this point to 2019, it's almost like 50% increase. But amazingly, those top 5 countries, well, at the beginning, it's really bad, as you can see. But from here onwards, the growth is immense and almost catching up to India. So they have a great momentum because I believe the Green Revolution is successfully, well, happened at least in these 5 countries. So at least top 5 countries, they increased the yield, and some other small areas like so-called pockets actually started to show the good growth of the yield. So The research to promote the rice growing is actually led by JICA's projects. And I'm sorry, maybe I made a little bit mistake. I mentioned the name of the country, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Uganda. But well, in these countries, actually, we have been conducting the randomized comparative studies in terms of the growing technology. If we randomize, and then the average characteristic would be the same. I mean, well, maybe education level and also the condition of growing the rice would be the same. Maybe the farmers will be same, but we somehow differentiate the technology, and then we see what happens. And then by doing so, we actually verify the importance of the guidance or instruction for the growing technology. And Uganda actually joined a different study, not randomized study, but other program of the JICA, and we also evaluated. And in case of Kenya, we also did some work, and also the researches of polishing the quality of the rice polishing quality of the country. And so I'm running out of time, so let me quickly summarize. So this is actually a comparative chart, grouping the farmers in Tanzania like leading farmers and intermediary farmers and others. For these leading farmers, let them actually select 5 peers or the 5 colleague farmers, that is called intermediary farmer. And then if we compare the unit yield, the year before the training, 3 ton for the leading farmers, and rest of the farmers like 2.5 ton. After training, 4.4, 4.8, and 5.3, and last year, 2012, the 4.6. But this is a year of the drought. So if they had the normal rain precipitation, and then I think they would maintain the level of 5 point something. And other intermediary farmers and others will gradually, slowly increase the yield. So intermediary farmers were well trained by the leading, the key farmers, and the rest of the farmers were actually watching them what happened. And at the beginning, their yield is quite low, but gradually increase its yield and productivity. So this approach by JICA is excellent, have a great the result. So if we train the trainer-like approach, like the provide the technology to the leading farmers, and that can be disseminated to the other peer farmers. So the intermediate farmers follow, and then that will be followed by other farmers. So the good technology can be widely disseminated, as you can see the result here. So this is my conclusion. So at last, the Green Revolution will be happening fully in Africa. The card led by JICA from 2008 has a great power to make the momentum of this movement. And by great teaching by Tsuboi-san, I would have to say, emphasize here again, that farming technology training is quite important to increase the yield of the lowland rice growing. And with that, I have to say, maybe majority of the people are not aware of this, even people in Africa. So the current card, the phase 2, the approaches to double the production, still be questioned by some people who is not knowledgeable about the actual essence of this green revolution. So then, well, I have to dare say that knowing the thing is, and also be understood and practiced by many people are totally different. So as a role of the economist, we need to collect the data and analyze, and also appeal the importance of the farming technology to the African leaders as well as the aid experts like the World Bank, where David Dow maybe will be listening my lecture somewhere, and also FAO and African Development Bank, and also researchers as well. Well, still, many researchers believe that green revolution is the seed fertilizer revolution, even recent years, and we need to change that mindset. And this year we have a variety of events, so it's a great opportunity for us to change their mindset, I believe. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Otsuka, for your lecture. Now we would like to start the talk session. I would like to ask all the panelists and speakers to turn your video on. In addition to Professor Otsuka, we have Professor Kikuchi Masao, Professor Emeritus of Chiba University, and then Mr. Tsuboi Tatsushi, JICA Senior Vice Technical Advisor. The moderator is Mr. Fujie Hitoshi, Executive Senior Research Fellow of JICA Ogata Research Institute. While you are listening to the talk session, you can send your questions by using the Q&A box of the Zoom function. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am Fujie from the JICA Ogata Research Institute, and I am the moderator of the session. I have been working for JICA over 20 years, and then in Uganda and Mozambique, I spent being based there for more than 10 years, and I was involved in the rice farming. And then under the auspices of Professor Kikuchi, I also wrote an academic paper about rice farming in Africa. So I am one of the persons most interested in this particular topic. I feel staggered in front of all these experts to moderate this session, but I'd like to do my best. Without further ado, I'd like to start the talk session. First of all, toward the end of Professor Otsuka's lecture, the emphasis was given on the importance of cultivation practices. I'd like to ask Mr. Tsuboi to talk about that topic. Senior Advisor Tsuboi was active for many, many years in Asian countries to transfer farming technologies and practices, and with JICA volunteers, and also in recent years in Uganda and in many areas in Sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Tsuboi was involved in the dissemination of the cultivation practices. So if you could please comment on the importance of cultivation practices, and following Professor Otsuka's presentation, please. Yes, thank you very much. In Africa, it is true that it is difficult for appropriate farming practices to be rooted in Africa. One of the major reasons for that is that rice is not one of the most mainstream crop in Africa. Cassava, maniocs, and potatoes and corns are still in Africa much higher in terms of priorities. When the rain season starts, corn is to be planted and to start for all the farmers in Africa, and rice is not yet a mainstream crop. So I think one of the reasons why it is not developed is that for African farmers it is not that important. It was successful in Asia. I worked there for 12 years or so. I learned so much from Asian farmers and about the rice farming. But in Africa, it was yet to start. And many African farmers have no experience of prior rice farming practices. So how to help them learn is challenging. And I worked much on Nerica, which is a dry field rice, but in a low land. I think the entrance for local farmers is perhaps the dry field rice. Can you show my slide one? Well, it is very labor intensive to do the irrigated rice paddy farming, because irrigation is first of all essential, and then so the rice paddy, irrigated rice paddies need to be developed, and then the rice seedlings and also the seed. So the seed bed needs to be prepared. Seedlings need to be grown, and then a transplanting from seedlings to the rice paddy needs to be done. So it takes a lot of experiences, a lot of knowledge. But if it's the upland rice growing, dry field rice growing, it takes only plowing, fine, making a soil fine, sowing seedling, covering with soil. It almost suffices. So it's much less. It takes much less practices and steps compared to the irrigated rice growing. So when you have a swamp and low marshland, and perhaps the first trial is the upland rice growing. And then once that upland rice growing is well taught, then migrating to the irrigated rice growing can be a good pathway, possibly. So thank you for my slide, and you can hide my slide already. Thank you. For rice plant, is quite robust, and as you saw in some of the slides of Professor Otsuka, 2 tons per hectare can be relatively easily achieved, even if the cultivation practices are not well improved. And since it is not a major crop in Africa, 2 tons can be enough in the perception of the local farmers. And then the local farmers in Africa who have never seen high yield harvest, they are happy with the 2 tons per hectare level of yield. It is another reason why they are not rapidly led to a higher yield. One major cause of the low level of yield at a deep transplanting. Can you show my second slide, please? It's not possible. Well, the seedlings can grow old and they become tall. So when the transplanting needs to be done, deep transplanting is required. Otherwise, the plant just falls down. And one of the reason why they become tall is that they are left for too long in a seed bed. They are not young enough as seedlings. And that needs to be really taught well to local farmers and as part of the appropriate practices. As you can see in these pictures, on the left-hand side, well, I was told that there were diseases. I went to the field. I understood it was not disease. It was just a deep planting. It was planted 20 centimeters deep. And then it really prevents a higher yield. Next slide, please. That's slide number 3, please. As you can see here, this way, 3 meters, 3 centimeters, 6 centimeters, 9 centimeters, 12 centimeters, and the deeper the transplanting it is, and even if the timing of the transplanting is the same, the height is that different. And I believe that the biggest reason of the low yield is the deep transplanting. It's so simple. Next slide, please. And this is about the seedling age. 3-week-old, and then 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and you can see that the older the seedlings are, the lower is the yield. With the 3-week seedlings, and you can achieve almost 6 tons per hectare. But with this type of regressional analysis, you can understand this. And y equal minus 515.2x, and x means 1 week. So the weight is reduced by 515 kilograms, and then you can see the yield reduction of 75 kilogram per hectare. This is the result of the experimentation I conducted. Seeing this type of results, and we understand that it is very important for the African farmers to understand that 3 weeks old seedlings need to be transplanted at that timing, not older. As Professor Otsuka said, the training of farmers and the trainings of the trainers is the key, because the farmers are having no experience of rice farming and can not do well, but then they can have it some volume, and they think that that's the right way to do. So from Asia to Africa, transferring cultivation practices of rice farming have those challenges that I've described. So that's about what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Tsuboi. About your comments, well, particularly in Africa, rice is just one of those crops. And then there are technological solutions which can be available, as you talked, based on your local experiences, but the motivation for improvement of farmers have had some challenges. And Professor Otsuka, could you please comment on that particular aspect? Well, Mr. Tsuboi is my teacher, so I have no objection, of course. Well, my time management was not done perfect in my presentation, but in those who know Asia in 1960s, I asked the question to some of them. What was the rice paddy field in Asia prior to Green Revolution? Well, I heard that there were bunds for sure. Leveling, perhaps. Straight row transplanting, no. But it was leveled, and there were bunds.
And then we had appropriate the seed and then fertilizers, and then we had success. But as Tsuboi-san mentioned, well, the people in Africa did not have the kind of experience, so we have to actually give them knowledge and experience through the training. And also, well, this is a point that Tsuboi-san emphasized me when I was there. So I actually kept that in mind. So then I brought the American leaders, also the trainers, to other location and very intensively trained them to be the leaders. So that was exactly what I did to follow the words by Tsuboi-san. And also starting with the land, dry land rice, and then move to the lowland rice. That is a quite interesting hypothesis. So I quite interestingly learned that idea. Thank you very much. And lots of other things we can deep dive, but because of the time restriction, let me move on to the next the topics. Next, slightly change the perspective, and well, we'd like to think about Asian Green Revolution. And what was the Green Revolution in Asia? What was that? So to that, I'd like to have the comment by Professor Kikuchi, and also one of the characteristics of the African agriculture is the kind of lack of or shortfall of the irrigation. Having said that, currently the climate change is a hot issue globally. Then we can't deny that the climate is rather unstable. That applies to Africa as well. When I was in Zambia several years, and then I had just once that normal weather, so to speak. So in that context, we have to think about irrigation, and we can't no longer say that even without irrigation, African agriculture can grow. So to this point, I'd like to have some comments by the professor as well. Yes, to these 2 points. First of all, the Green Revolution in Asia. Well, the Professor Otsuka fully explained about that already. But from my perspective, Well, it's like the shocking. It's quite shocking because, well, let me share with you some data. I think that is quite making sense when I explain this. I was born in 1949, and then was the time of the shortfall of the food just after World War II, and also we have to eat Yangon rice, Saigon rice, and others brought from outside of Japan. And Duncan rice, the current Myanmar-made rice, Bangkok rice, and also the Saigon rice. These are the majority of the rice I ate when I was a kid. And before 3 or 4 years before the Professor Otsuka come to Hokkaido University, actually I was student there, and I remember still one of the lecturers saying as follows: Asian rice doesn't move around. I mean, not cross border. Maybe the Thailand is the only one which can export the rice, but that is just amount less than 2 million ton right now. Do you know how much rice they export? 8 million ton per year. And Vietnam actually did very well after Vietnam War. Now they export 5 million ton. Philippines is a kind of importing country, and Indonesia as well. So in net, in Asian country, well, Southeast Asia export 10 million ton. And Southeast Asia, like the Bangladesh, they are doing better than before, but still importing. But Pakistan, India, they also export. Do you know how much they export? 10 million ton in 2018. That is the average number of the sort of 5 years. That's worth the same amount in Southeast Asia. But, well, in the past it was zero because they produce exactly the amount they consume within the country. But right now they are able to export to 20 million ton, and that happened after the late 1970s. And half of them actually exported to Africa. Interesting enough, in late 1970s, rather cheap price rice importing happened everywhere. So the rice production, about 3,700 ton of the grain level rice are exported, and well, 1/3 are actually from Asia. So the point is, the movement and transaction of the rice becomes so rapid and also the large. So then the country like or the India actually export 20 million ton, and then half of them actually go to Africa. Because of the Green Revolution in Asia, you may have known this as a fact, but it was astonishing for me. But first of all, I was so surprised to learn that India export the 10 million ton exporting rice outside, and then importing the food actually rather weakened the domestic agriculture. So that's the thing we have to think about. And also the regarding the irrigation with seed and fertilizer technology is no good, as Professor Otsuka said. But before we talk about that, the irrigation is the foundation. Without irrigation, Asian Green Revolution did not happen. There are, I have to say, the pros and cons for the Asian Green Revolution, because Rockefeller and also the other huge foundation gave us a fund. We used a huge amount of money, so without worrying about the money, we actually can do whatever we wanted. And then that all of a sudden stopped sometimes around 1970s. So the latter half of the 20th century in Asia actually had a mistake, as I just mentioned, and that should not repeat again. So for the African Green Revolution, we should not repeat the same mistake and should take the right decision and direction. The yield or the productivity actually grew in Asia immensely, but not the case. It's not the case in Sub-Saharan Africa. When we think about that, the unit yield in SSA, according to Professor Otsuka, 2.5 ton. Okay, the irrigation rate is rather staggered, but the yield has been growing. What does it mean? So the Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, there are lots of the land which is appropriate for rice growing. So even without huge scale dam or the irrigation system, they can actually grow the rice 3 tons or 4 tons with maybe the lesser effort. So this is a key and insight we have to leverage for the success of the Green Revolution in Africa. So unlike the large-scale dam, which is actually built in latter 20th century approach, but even without that, maybe we can do something else, which is more appropriate for Africa. And so the approaches or the measures we can take varies from large scale to smaller scale. So we have to wisely think about whatever we can take advantage of, whatever is appropriate to proceed the revolution or green revolution in Africa. So that's one of my ideas. Sorry for the long explanation. Thank you for the comment. Yes, so somehow the shocking Asian green revolution, lasting impact, and some pros and cons. You kindly summarize. And then also you emphasize when we think about utilization of the land of Africa, we should find out the appropriate, most suitable approaches to the African land. So Professor Otsuka, do you have any comment to this? Yes, so maybe I can say as follows.
Well, growing an irrigated rice in a swamp or low marshland, and I think perhaps a better management of water can be possible. Perhaps one idea can be a small-scale irrigation. Well, how small is a question. No one, neither myself, have looked into that topic as a research topic, and possibly that's one of the areas I would like to conduct my research on most going forward. Well, thank you very much. We exited the given time slot for the talk session, so we would like to go straight to the question and answer session with the audience. Many participants sent us comments or questions. Well, from David Zhao, there is a question. Regarding the adoption of the cultivation practices in Africa, the level of wages and other economic and social constraints, are they having some impact? That's a question from David. And Professor Otsuka, if you could please address the question. Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to have a question from David, and I've been his acquaintance for many, many years, and he's really an excellent economist. And I saw his name in the participants list, and I was wondering if he was there really, and I know that he's there. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for this very good question. The wages in Africa are not very well known. When we try to calculate the profit which can be gained from the rice field, well, we have to factor in the family labor. So family labor does not have an official wage, so we have to do the imputation using the average labor wage. And then, but then we see that there are wrong imputations because then the profit level calculated as a result of that in Africa becomes really awkward. So wages, maybe it's fair to say that wages are high, perhaps. But regardless of that, if it's a case, well, the training is provided by the JICA and the randomized controlled trial, RCT, is conducted. We can see that the effect is really great. Maybe the wage is one issue, but then, the cultivation practices effect can really almost erase that. I think that's the importance of the cultivation practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to also introduce other question. So about use of the land in Africa. So the per person farming land has been decreasing, and so well, it is true that the arable land has been decreasing per person because of the increase of the population and city. And the related question from the others is that the lowland use or the dryland rice production is actually proceeded. But in the context of climate change, the dryland can be used more for the rice growing, the farming in the future in the context of climate change. Professor Otsuka? Well, up to 30 years ago, I'd say that, well, if they have more population and they actually go up to the hill and cut the tree and create the land for grow the corn. And then I believe that they did not think they can utilize low swamp land. So then they all of a sudden learned that they actually can utilize the low swamp land for rice growing. So then there's no sort of competition or some resistance to use the low land for growing rice there. Regarding the climate change, I think the climate change, then the drought would be happen more often, and then maybe the typhoon and the other things would happen. But in case of typhoon, for example, the lowland rice growing or farming is a kind of, well, the agriculture may be affected largely by the climate change. So then that is the impact we have to think about growing the lowland rice growing under the climate change. Okay, so can I have also comment? Well, in the past, well, this is a comment by Mr. Tsuboi. So, yes, the African people just learned their lowland or wetland can be usable. And the Zambia the other year actually have the drought. But the Narika, the rice variety, had rather better harvest. And that made them re-recognize the use of the low swamp land. Thank you very much. Okay, next move on to the last question.
So this is the last question we can address. Well, it is not regarding the technology per se, but then it's about more distribution. SDGs is also try to tackle the famine and hunger, and then production is not the whole problem. That distribution is also an issue. So perhaps the logistics and distribution needs to be developed better, and not only a production and the technologies of farming, but then a production method and a distribution method, so that food can really reach the most vulnerable people. What should be the system or solutions and for that to happen? Well, I am an economist. Economists believe in the market. Well, structural adjustment in Africa. structural adjustment in Africa reduced significantly the intervention on the part of the government. And then it decreased the production volume, and then distribution became much more difficult. So the structural adjustments became notorious. That is true for short-term period. But I have been seeing in the last 5 to 10 years the positive outcome of structural adjustment, because the market became much more active, and then the ladies are carrying a lot of bags of rices, and they are very active distributing them, and milk it became much more widespread. So I think it's really great. Structural adjustments, positive outcomes are becoming visible now. Now, distribution. Well, particularly poor people who are being supported by the benefits, well, I think we have to treat them specially. But then when we think about the general public, when the production becomes better, I am 100% convinced that the distribution can reach them in general. Thank you very much. Professor Kikuchi? Well, in Uganda and in Asia and in Philippines, and we did some survey and researches about the intermediaries of the Philippines and Uganda. And then in terms of their functions, no difference at all. They perform exactly the same functions. They were facing exactly the same challenges. So as Professor Otsuka said, the market functions really. And the mobile phone is the difference, which is available today in Uganda, but that was not available in the Philippines back then. And the mobile phone is really the means of communication of information. So when the price goes down, it is immediately communicated through mobile phones. In early 1980s, when I was in Asia, when the rice price was announced in Indonesia, several hours later, the latest price information was already spread, even if there was no mobile phone available back then there. So the information, the stock price information is so essential and reaches so rapidly. I believe that then it shows the importance of the function of the market for the distribution and to reach a general public. Thank you very much. The discussion is so interesting. We would like to go more in depth, but time is limited.
And in fact, although we can't cover, but the question actually asks, some of the question is asking about the digital usage of the agriculture. But because of the time limitation, I'm sorry, I have to close this Q&A session. Now we'd like to close this session. So lastly, we have closing remark from Shinjiro Anameshi, Deputy Director General, JICA Economic Development Department.
Thank you very much. I am Anameshi from JICA Economic Development Department. Thank you very much. My name is Mameshi. I am from JICA Economic Development Department, responsible of agriculture in Africa. Thank you very much to all the speakers and experts, Professor Otsuka, Dr. Tsuboi, and then Professor Kikuchi, and the moderator, Mr. Fujiie. A very valuable lecture and then discussions were shared. And we have been working on a card, and then in the phase 1 of card, the doubling of the production of rice was successful. The goal was successfully achieved. And then I was in Tanzania when the card phase 1 started in 2008. And then it was about 900,000 tons per hectare at that time. But then Tanzania's yield as of today is well over 2 million tons as a production volume. And then since 1990, 90s, we have been supporting African countries and for rice farming. And with the beginning of the CARD in 2008, it became really in full-fledged. And we also conducted a training session, not only at the national centers, but also local training sectors. And they gained the knowledge and skills, and then the technology and practices were first transferred to the key farmers and then to intermediary farmers. And besides, JICA has been conducting a training for irrigation. And not only CARA, the other activities for support of the rice farming in Africa have been implemented, and then the current success and development that we are seeing as of today are really fruits of all of these efforts. Tanzania is only one of the examples, one of the cases. Currently, there are about 20 ongoing projects in Africa about the rice farming today. As for rice, the demands are growing, as it was said also in your discussion. And then, well, we are still in halfway to make the green revolution happen really. So the technology transfer that we have been working on today so far, we will continue to work on today to strive to make it happen. And also we are going to work on better distribution for consumptions. So now we have to make turn the dots into surfaces. And then we are not the only actors, and the academia and government officials and practitioners and of government members of African countries. With all of the players and actors, we would like to make a significant momentum and wave for the African Green Revolution to happen. And then all those participants and speakers that we are sharing this knowledge forum today, I am sure are really interested in working with us for that goal for the Green Revolution in Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Amameshi. With this, we close the 11th Knowledge Forum of the JICA Ogata Research Institute. Professor Otsuka, Professor Kikuchi, Dr. Tsuboi, all the speakers and all the participants, and thank you very much for your participation. I would like to send you a big applause of hands to close. Thank you very much.